Thank you for our praise team, and thank you for being here today. Those of you who could, we're glad to see you. Really, really happy to see you. Yeah, like Davidson said, I'm continuing on this sermon series from Daniel entitled Lions and Dreams and Deception. And today, the title is Faith and Fire. For those of you who are familiar with the book of Daniel, oh yeah, this is going to be about blah, blah, blah. But I also know that for some of you, this is the first time you're ever going to hear this. And so I'm so glad that you chose to join us, either if you're here live or perhaps you're going to listen to this later on during the week. But I'm glad that you're here today to hear a little bit more about faith and fire. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how hard it is to let go of power. No matter how big or small power is, once we have it, it seems that it's hard to let it go. And our poor friend Donald Trump went out kicking and screaming when he was replaced by Joe Biden. And do you blame him? I don't. One of the most influential positions in the whole world. He had a heavy agenda and he couldn't get it all done in 4 years. And he was going to change America and make it great again. And I don't doubt his intentions, and I'm not saying any of this to make fun of him, only to say that it's hard to let go of something that you are so passionate about when you're a leader. We can take it down to a lower level where husbands and wives bicker about where to go on holidays. And if you give in, you let go of some power. And what we're about to look at today is really no different. And I've entitled it Faith and Fire. And I hope that you can capture the essence of this chapter, because that when life throws an obstacle your way, you have two choices. I really believe this, whether you're a Christian or not. You only have two choices. You either face it on your own, which a lot of us do, or you face it with God. Few of us do. So, we're not really sure how much time passed between Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 3, but it was long enough for King Nebuchadnezzar to have second thoughts about his dream. Remember his dream? We talked about it last week, the toenails of history. And you may remember the statue with the 4 metals, and you know, we had the toes, the 10 toes, and then this rock that crushed it and became an everlasting kingdom. And you may even remember Nebuchadnezzar's reaction once Daniel told him his dream. And he was absolutely, totally amazed. He says it in verse 47 at the end of Daniel chapter 2. He says, "Truly your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord of kings over kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret to me." So we finished Daniel chapter 2 with Nebuchadnezzar absolutely, totally amazed by what God did through Daniel. Those are his words. That sounds to me like a pretty convinced guy. Like one who accepts that God has just showed him the future. But at some point, it hit home that his kingdom was not going to last forever. And if there's one thing that kings and prime ministers and presidents want more than anything else, is to establish a legacy for themselves. Millions of people suffer all over this world as dictators pass down the power to their sons and grandsons, and they continue to ignore the simple needs of their own people all over this world. And Nebuchadnezzar had been taunted by this dream, because we read in the opening pages of Daniel chapter 3 the following. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall, and 9 feet wide. And he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. What's wrong with this? It's all gold. Is that what he dreamed? No, right? That is not what he dreamed. The dream only had the head of the statue made out of gold, but he built the whole statue out of gold. And I want you to understand the underlying message that Nebuchadnezzar was basically saying to God. He was basically saying, my kingdom is going to last forever. He never said it, but we can assume that that's what he said by what he did. Never mind the chest of silver, and then the thighs of bronze, and the legs of iron, and the feet, and this thing coming down from the sky, crushing it. Never mind all of that. My kingdom is going to last forever. And you know, in some way, I feel that our society and our world feels the same way about God's authority, whether it is spoken or unspoken. Our world struggles with what God says and what God teaches because it so more often now, more than ever before, opposes the popular opinion. Whether it's marriage, whether it's who we identify as, whether it's how we rule people, and I believe that the divide is going to continue to get stronger and wider and wider and wider as we continue to go. I think this is why our governments, for the most part, have done everything they can to kind of just remove God out of the picture, out of our lives. And I remember I was watching a hockey game this week, and they were singing the Canadian national anthem. And I was listening to the words. And one of the sentences says, God keep our land glorious and free. Do you know what it means to ask God to keep our land glorious and free? I think we do this with most of the songs. You know, we'll listen to a song and, oh, I want to do this to you tonight. We don't even think about it, you know. We just sing these words and, you know, I live in a yellow submarine or what. All these different songs over the years that mean something totally different. And here we're singing, God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, whatever. And some of the people who are singing this are actually atheists. You know, I think that if we say, God keep our land, what we're really saying is, you are the authority. This is your land, God, and because it's your land, you've made us stewards of it, but you're in charge. Therefore, whatever we do as a country should be vetted by you. We are subjects to you, God. You are the wise one, and we need wisdom from you. This place belongs to you, not to us. But we don't really want God to keep our land, do we? At least that's not the message that I get from my leaders. So he lets us run it. The Bible says he sets up kings and he takes down kings. So he lets us run it. And he waits for us to turn to him. And the same goes for your private personal life. He will let you run it until you get to a place when you say, well, this is your body, this is your mind, you created me, you fashioned me for a purpose. I need to know what that purpose is for me, God. Remember what I said last week. You don't need to choose to be on the wrong side to be on the wrong side. You just need to ignore the right side. Because by default, we're on the wrong side. And if you don't believe in God, isn't it just evident that we're on the wrong side? Just look at our society. Look how many people hate each other. Look at what people have done to people, what people do to people. But you know what's interesting about the story is that Nebuchadnezzar was actually intentionally ignoring the right side. Not only did he act defiantly, but if you go with me to Daniel chapter 3, he actually forced others to do the same. It says, and King Nebuchadnezzar in verse 2 sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So all these guys came in. I'm not going to repeat their names again. And it says they stood up before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4, then a herald cried out loud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the time that you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately in the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. Let me be clear, this is an open act of defiance. My dream told me that I was to worship the true God, but my statue says that I am the true God. Bow down and worship me, is basically what Nebuchadnezzar was saying. And you know, the reality is that the king's behavior is really not that much different than ours. Our golden statues may be not golden metal per se, but in a form of constitutions and policies and so on and so forth, or maybe even bank accounts and political positions and religious beliefs. You know that people make up their own rules and then they say, God said so. What they're really saying is, I said that God said so. Or our governments say, you know, this is the morality that we need to live by now. We have our own gods. And you know, something that I find really interesting, this is really a sermon for another time, but I just want to throw this out there, is that it was all linked to music. You know, when you go to the dentist, you got the soothing music, and while the guy's pulling your teeth, like, oh, this is great, you know. You go to the shopping, you go shopping in the mall, and they got this music, and the next thing you know, you're like, yeah, $200 later, like music has a way to make us do things or to not think about what we're doing. And so he links this worship, and he's got all of his leaders. Notice he didn't bring the peasants and the farmers. He brought in the satraps and the counselors and administrators and all the rulers. It's okay. When the music plays, you bow down. Like how, I don't know what the music was, but music is being used in ways because, you know, God created something beautiful. Like today when I was singing the songs, you know, music gets me to a place of worship. It gets me to a place of recognition of who God is and who I am. And the words just really take me to that place. And I can get there without music as well. If I read the Bible alone in the morning, I go there too. Anyhow, just a little caveat there. Be mindful of the music and how it influences you in your life, because it has a way to just allow your subconscious to swallow things that you would normally not swallow at all if it wasn't disguised with music. But here we go again. And underdogs take the spotlight. While everyone in the then known kingdom bows down to worship, which means to give worth to the statue, 3 young men decide to stay up and not bow down. They were Daniel's 3 friends. You may remember them from Daniel chapter 2. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And Daniel wasn't there. We don't know why he wasn't there, but my very first sermon that I ever preached, I'll never forget this. I wasn't even a pastor then. This was in Quebec. And I preached about Daniel in the fiery furnace. He was never there. And an old lady came up to me at the end. That was a great sermon, but Daniel never was in the fiery furnace. So it wasn't Daniel, but it was his 3 friends. All right, now that I've totally embarrassed me, let's go to Daniel and go to verse 8. This is, therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. And they said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, you've made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of all those instruments, you shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the middle of the fiery furnace. Well, guess what, king? You know those refugees, those people that you brought in at one point and that you put in charge of me? Those Jews that you set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, the position that I should have? Well, guess what? They don't even care about you. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the gold image which you have set up. I find those accusations very interesting. We typically like to blow things up to always make them look worse than they actually are, right? They pay no attention to you. That was the accusation number 1. Well, if that was the case, they wouldn't even be there. That wasn't true. They refused to serve your gods. That was true. And they do not worship the golden statue that you have set up. That was true. But they tried to make this personal, when in reality, it really had nothing to do with the king, but everything to do with their God. The Bible is clear that we should not make images. You can read it in the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy. I'm not going to spend any time on that. But the Bible says we shouldn't make them, and the Bible says we shouldn't pray to them. Well, that pretty much wipes out half of the religious cults around the world right now who do it. But the Bible says we shouldn't do it, because at the end of the day, there's only one God, and He doesn't need an image because we don't know what He looks like. Even people who wear crosses and worship those crosses, God never asked us to do that. God never asked us to worship an image, because that means nothing to Him. What really means something to Him is if your heart is aligned with Him. Because everything else is external, but God cares about the inside. That's really what matters to Him. It's not old school. Some people consider it old school, Deuteronomy, Exodus. And that's why sometimes I think Christians can be marginalized, because they're behind the times. They're not following with where we're going. But there are some truths in the Bible that I believe are timeless. And for that reason, sometimes people get discredited. You're just way behind the times. But these young men were behind the times. This is new. This is a new thing. This is a new fad. This is the iPhone of Nebuchadnezzar. Here's a statue, bow down to it. And if you don't, I'm going to burn you. And they choose to stay up. They chose to be old school. And the history of humanity, at least from the statue's perspective, describes nations with multiple gods, right? If you look back into history, Babylon had many gods. The Medo-Persians had many gods. The Greeks, I mean, come on. Sometimes I watch quiz shows and they ask questions about Greek mythology and all these. They have thousands of gods as far as I know. Romans just followed suit. And every single one of the kings in these nations were considered to be gods. Ironically, though, we now live in what I would consider to be an atheistic North America. They say that the fastest growing religion in North America right now is atheism. Basically, people who don't believe in God. And our societies are getting split. And Satan is having a heyday with our poor, confused minds and hearts. Needless to say, the king wasn't happy. Go to verse 13. He says, then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the time you hear the sound of all these instruments, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, then you're going to be cast immediately into the midst of the fiery furnace. And who, oh man, come on. Come on. Come on. Who is the God that will deliver you from me? Come on, don't mess around with God. You see, Nebuchadnezzar knew. This is the interesting thing. He knew. Just like people in our society today, they know. They have experienced. Some people who claim to be Christians have experienced the power of God, yet we are powerless. Who is the God who's going to deliver you from me? Well, listen to the answer. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, thank you so much for a second chance. Is that what he said? Nah. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we really don't want to talk to you about this. This is basically what they're saying. If it's the case, our God is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if he doesn't deliver us, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up. Okay, I need to go on a tangent here. This is so important. He gives them a chance. Oh man, I'm so late in my slides here. He gives them a chance. They say no. Faith and fire. Right here. Faith and fire. And one's going to win and the other one's going to lose. And in this case, faith wins. We don't need to defend ourselves before you. We don't need to defend ourselves before you. You see, some life decisions, and this is why I'm preaching this series. This is why I've invited you to join me, my friends, who maybe you don't have the same understanding of God that I have. This is why I've invited you here. Because some decisions in life have to be made before the fire comes. They obeyed the king as far as they could. They came to the plain of Dura. They came in front of the image. But they knew before they showed up what they would do. They attended the dedication knowing that their beliefs might be challenged. And some people have the idea that faith is this kind of magic or good luck charm. if you pray long enough, if you believe strong enough, you'll never get sick, you'll never be in debt, and you'll always be happy. Faith is not a get-out-of-jail-free card where God will grant you whatever you want. And if you're listening to this right now and you don't believe in God, then please, I just want you to know that if anybody's ever taught you that, they have misrepresented God before you. These 3 teenagers, maybe they're not teenagers anymore, they're probably grown up by now, by Daniel chapter 3. They had no doubt that God could deliver them from this life and death situation, but they didn't automatically assume that He would. You know, faith may lead you to fire, or may I even maybe venture out to say, you can't really have faith until you have fire. I know a lot of people who claim that they have faith. I've seen them in all kinds of churches, and then something really bad happens to them, and all of a sudden they're gone. That's really when faith is seen, isn't it? And I'm guilty. You know, as I grow in Christ, there's certain things that I have not had faith in. Some preachers talk about prosperity gospel where your prayers force God to bring good upon you. And that if good doesn't happen, then you simply you didn't have enough faith. Because if you had enough faith, I have somebody who blamed me that I don't have enough faith because I got the vaccine. A member of this church. Some preachers talk about these things. Some people talk about these things. We almost think, we're telling God what He needs to do for us. But it's not true. Because if that was the case, don't you think that God would have found an easier way to save this world than to give His only begotten Son? To die on a wooden cross? And to be quite honest, it is hardship that molds us for life, and for faith. I've talked about this book before, but it's just absolutely a phenomenal book. It's called The Triple Package. It's written by Amy Chua and Jed Rubenfeld. And in this book called The Triple Package, on page 26, 28, it says that they did an in-depth study of what are the common characteristics that would enable one to be successful in the United States. And they looked at different backgrounds, immigrants, non-immigrants. They looked at different people. And simply put, they have these 3 things that are needed to be successful, immigrant or not. Number 1, you need to have a superiority complex. What that means is a deeply internalized belief in your group's specialness, exceptionality, and superiority. This is not a Christian book, so just be mindful of that. But I think there's a point here that I'm trying to make. Number 2, insecurity. You need to be insecure in order to be successful. It says, I have to look here, an anxious uncertainty about your worth or place in society, a feeling or worry that you and what you've done or what you have is in some fundamental way not good enough. That sounds like a Christian principle of some sort. And lastly, impulse control. The ability to resist temptation. Especially the temptation to give up in the front of hardship or quit instead of persevering at a difficult task. And according to Amy and Jed, these are the most successful people in North America. And not that long ago, the book was taken off the shelf because it supposedly discriminates against Americans. Because all the people who are successful are immigrants in the United States. because they've been through some of these things. Whereas here in North America, we avoid these things. We avoid them. I also like Amy Duckworth's book called Grit. Now you can tell what kind of year I've had by the books that I read. You know, this is interesting. She grew up in a Chinese family, and she writes her story at the beginning. Very interesting book. Any young people going to university right now, you should read this book. Or anybody who thinks that their life is really hard. You can read this book. And her father always told her and her siblings that they were no genius, only to see her win the MacArthur Fellowship some years later, often called the Genius Grant. She attributes it to those three things that Amy and Jed talked about in the triple package. So please, let me set the record straight for everyone who's listening right now. If any Christian ever tells you that the concept of God shelters you from hardship, don't believe them. Don't believe them. Following God is what builds grit. It's what builds impulse control. It's what builds insecurity. These three young men had the perfect situation to test their character, and they passed because they had been faithful in the small things in their lives. Faith doesn't deliver us from fire. Rather, faith delivers us through fire. A woman went to a pastor and said, I'm not a Christian, but I've been told that if I believe enough and if I have enough faith that I would never get cancer. But then I went to my doctor because I noticed I was losing weight and I was a little nauseated and I had some other symptoms, and my doctor diagnosed the problem as a malignant cancer that was rapidly growing. So I began treatments, she says. That was about 6 months ago, she says, and I've been in chemotherapy and radiation therapy, but my cancer has metastasized and the medical prognosis is not good. My physician has indicated that I should put my life in order because I only have but a short time to live. And one of my Christian friends told me, if you had enough faith, God would deliver you from your cancer. So the woman told the pastor, now I have two problems. Not only am I going to die, but supposedly it's my fault because I don't have enough faith. So I prayed and I prayed, but things just kept getting worse. She even told me that there must be some sin left in my life that I have not confessed, and that's why God is not healing me. That sounds like a book in the Bible called Job and his friends. So now I have three problems, she says. I have cancer, I don't have enough faith, and I'm going to hell. She says, I never want to go to church again. But she says, then I read Daniel chapter 3. She says, by the time I read Daniel chapter 3, I finally understood that faith does not mean no trouble, but it does mean inner peace. And she decided that from that moment on, she would accept whatever God sends her way. She's still alive today. God totally healed her from her cancer. But she knew, if my God doesn't do it, I'm not going to bow down to that image. I am not going to worship your God. I am not going to believe in some superstition. I will trust God no matter what. By the time the king showed mercy and offered the young men a second chance and they refused, he was livid. I mean, come on, go to it with me. He's pretty nasty. All right, he says, then verse 19, King Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed. Maybe, children, you've seen that in your mom and dad, maybe. When you do something and all of a sudden the face changes, you know you're in trouble, all right? This is what's happening to him. It says, his face changed towards these three men. And he spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind these guys and to throw them in the furnace. But then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and they were cast into the midst of the fire furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot, the flame killed the men who threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they fell down, bound into the midst of the fiery furnace. So hot and so angry that he killed his own soldiers. But then something happens. This is amazing. I'm pretty sure King Nebuchadnezzar probably was like, what? It says the King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste, and he spoke, saying to his counselors, how many guys did we throw in there again? And they said, yeah, we threw 3 people into the fiery furnace. King, oh king, live forever. Like they're just, doing whatever they can to just make sure this guy's all buttered up, right? He says, look, he answered. I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. And they're not hurt. And the 4th guy looks like a god. And I can just imagine, oh man, I remember that dream. What a fool I am. You see, this is the thing about life, and this is the thing about you. Wherever you are in your life, and I am the last one to judge you, and anybody in this room should be the last one to judge anybody else, because the journey to God is difficult, and it is difficult because the world tells us we shouldn't be there. And so Nebuchadnezzar has a second chance. I would say a pretty convincing one, wouldn't you? 3 guys, unbound, with a friend who just decided to show up in the middle of a fiery furnace. If that doesn't wake you up to God, I don't know what will. God showed up. That's what happened. God showed up because he was challenged to show up. Which God is going to come and free you from me? Remember? God showed up. Some versions of the Bible use the word one like the Son of God. Some people say it was Jesus. Regardless, I don't want to start a theological argument here. It was a figure that was so foreign to the king that he had to label it as something else than human. So I don't know what he saw. Man, I wish he had an iPhone and just snapped a picture of that and just put it in my Bible in Daniel chapter 3. That would have been pretty amazing. God shows up. God worked a miracle on their behalf. God delivered them from a sure death. Even the soldiers who didn't even go in fell dead. And here they are walking around with a new friend. Well, maybe he's not a new friend. Maybe he's an old friend. Someone that they knew and someone that they had trusted. You see, God may not always answer the way we want. But how can He ever answer if we don't ask? In this case, He freed them. But we know from history that there are many people who died for their faith. They would not recant. And God did not free them. But He freed these men because ultimately, God had one purpose in all of this. What was it? He wanted to win Nebuchadnezzar's heart. And He knew there was a crack in that heart of his. God is real, folks. This is not a fairy tale. There are millions of people around the world who have experienced something like this in their lives. They have seen the manifestation of God's miraculous power in their lives or in the lives of people they love. This is real. God is real. But you gotta have faith. And it is impossible to even know you have it unless there's a fire. So if you decide right now as you're listening to this, I'm going to give God a chance, get ready to get burnt. Or, in this case, you won't get burnt because when they walked out, they didn't even smell like smoke. I hate camping. I come home from camping, even my underwear smell like smoke. I hate that smell. I hate camping. Not just for that, but that's definitely one of the reasons. I always try to sit in the fire where the smoke is not going, but guess what? Yeah, you've experienced it too, haven't you? You move there and the smoke starts to go there. Then you move on the other side and the smoke goes there. And you go home and you smell like you smoked 25 packs of cigarettes in one day. And you can't go camping without a fire, right? So, there you go. You got to have faith, and it's impossible to even know you have it unless there's a fire. So let fire become an opportunity for God to show up. And the most beautiful thing about faith is that it often impacts not just you, but the people around you. Let's finish this chapter. I'm almost done. Verse 26, Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and he said, "Hey guys!" I can't believe he's even talking to them, right? "Servants of the Most High God." This is how I know that he remembered the dream. "Servants of the Most High God, come out." It's so foolish. Like even just to talk to people in a fire, right? "Come out." And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the middle of the fire. Whoever said they didn't listen to the king? They listened to the king. And then the satraps and all the wise guys, they came together and they saw that these men, there was no fire on their bodies, their hair were not singed, and their garments weren't affected, and it didn't even smell like smoke. And then verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar speaks again. Sounds a lot like the closing of Daniel chapter 2. He says, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they did not listen to me. And they yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God." You see, up to this point, still now, does this God belong to Nebuchadnezzar? It does not. This is why I've entitled the next sermon, Nebuchadnezzar's insanity. Daniel chapter 4. For I believe that in the next chapter, we will learn exactly what Nebuchadnezzar learned. And so what I'm selling to you here is not some kind of snake oil charming message, or to tell you that if you follow God, all your problems will go away. No, the reality of life is that it's hard. And it's because of sin. And it's because Satan does everything he can to discourage you and to make life difficult for you. But what Satan doesn't understand is that if you are a Bible-believing, praying, trusting in God Christian, what Satan throws your way will only make you stronger. And so, welcome to the journey of Christianity for some of you. And like I said, I am not trying to sell you an experience that doesn't exist. I'm trying to sell you truth and reality. That you're going to get inner peace even though the outside may not feel the way it does. Positive thinking, meditation, the great outdoors. Many of you have found ways to cope. And all those things may be good, but nothing beats connecting with the one who knows you better and the one who fashioned you. I'm going to invite you again. Now, somebody took off my PowerPoint. I don't know why. But that's fine. You guys can come up if you want to sing again. I'll let you do that. I don't know why I said that. You know, like, it's hard to let go of power. See what I mean? See what I mean? See, next time fire comes your way, will you consider faith? Will you consider faith? You may be surprised how much impact it will have on you, but also how much impact it will have on others. So by now, Nebuchadnezzar's got to be convinced, right? Come on. This fire experience. Well, like I said, next week. Actually, no. Not next week. Next week, for those of you who are listening right now, we will not have a service here. The church will be closed. And if you've received the Thursday email, our communications director has made an easy link for you to click on to be able to join adult service, youth service, children's service, early teen service for what we call the Ontario Camp Meeting. So next week, stay home. Enjoy, and it starts on Wednesday, and I'll show you a video at the end just before we go to let you know all about it. But you may be surprised how much an impact faith can have on you and for others. And next week we're going to see that it took a third step for Nebuchadnezzar to understand what I hope you will understand too, that Jesus Christ wants to be your personal Savior.